Ladies and gentlemen, the world just stopped for a moment. Can you feel it? That shiver running down the spine of global politics? That sound echoing across continents? It's the sound of history shifting right before our eyes. Today in Beijing, three giants, Russia, China, and India, have locked arms in a way the world never expected. A coalition not born out of convenience but out of courage, a unity forged in the heat of defiance, staring straight into the eyes of a world order that believed it could not be challenged. And as if the stage wasn't dramatic enough, whispers rise that Kim Jong Un himself is on the way. This is not just diplomacy, this is destiny. For too long, one voice from across the ocean believed it could dictate the fate of nations. One man, one administration, waving sanctions like swords, daring the world to step out of line. But tonight, three leaders have chosen to write a different story, one of sovereignty, of strength, of standing tall when told to kneel. Let's be clear, this is not about war, but about respect. About nations tired of being lectured, tired of being threatened, tired of being treated as pawns in someone else's game. Russia brings its power. China brings its influence. India brings its rising might and moral conviction. Together, they bring a message to Washington louder than any speech, stronger than any sanction. The world will no longer move to the drumbeat of one capital alone. And ladies and gentlemen, as Kim Jong Un speeds toward Beijing, imagine the headlines tomorrow. Imagine the panic, the calculations, the hurried phone calls in corridors of power thousands of miles away. Because tonight, the balance of power isn't just shifting, it's crashing like thunder. The question is no longer whether the world will change. The question is whether America is ready to face the reality that it already has. Historic unity in Beijing is not just an event. It is a moment that rewrites the very script of international relations. When Russia, China, and India chose to stand together, they didn't just shake hands for cameras or sign empty declarations. They announced to the world that the age of isolation, division, and fear was crumbling before our eyes. For decades, global power moved like a one-way street, where one nation dictated the terms and others were expected to follow. But in Beijing, under the glare of global spotlight, three leaders stood side by side, unafraid, unshaken, and unmistakably clear in their purpose. It is more than politics. It is the heartbeat of nations refusing to be silenced, voices rising together in defiance of being told where they belong in the hierarchy of power. This unity carries a weight far beyond trade deals or military cooperation. It is the embodiment of sovereignty, of cultures rich and ancient, of civilizations that have endured centuries and are now reclaiming their rightful place in shaping the world's destiny. When Moscow, Beijing, and New Delhi choose to converge, the tremors are felt not only in Washington, but in every capital where leaders believe the balance of power was unshakable. This alliance is not about aggression, but assertion. It is the bold announcement that no single nation, no matter how mighty, can hold the monopoly on leadership forever. The symbolism is powerful. Three nations, representing billions of people, standing as one voice against the era of intimidation politics. And this unity isn't accidental. It is born out of necessity, out of a shared understanding that the future must be built on cooperation rather than coercion, on respect rather than threats. It signals to smaller nations watching nervously from the sidelines that the global stage is no longer the playground of a few, but an arena where diversity of power is the new reality. The image of these three powers uniting under the same roof in Beijing will travel across time as the day when the winds of change became unstoppable, when the old order began to crack, when the world witnessed that strength doesn't come from standing alone, but from standing together. Defiance against U.S. dominance in Beijing was not spoken in whispers. It thundered through the air with every handshake, every shared glance between leaders who refused to bow before a single power's might. For too long, Washington had believed it could set the rules of the game, drawing lines on maps, imposing sanctions, issuing warnings, deciding who should rise and who must fall. But in that historic moment, Russia, China, and India made it clear the world is not a chessboard for one player alone. This defiance was not reckless or impulsive. It was calculated, deliberate, born out of years of watching one administration after another dictate terms without listening to the voices of other nations. The stage in Beijing was not about rebellion for its own sake. It was about reclaiming dignity in international affairs, about saying no to a system where power meant control rather than cooperation. As the cameras flashed and the world watched, the symbolism could not be ignored. Three major powers representing history, population, economy, and military might, standing together and refusing to be treated as spectators in a drama dominated by Washington's script. This defiance does not seek chaos, it seeks balance. It demands a world where no single capital can unilaterally decide the fate of others, where respect replaces intimidation, where dialogue defeats threats. And make no mistake, this united stand was aimed straight at the heart of America's habit of policing the world, of using fear as a weapon to keep nations in line. It was as if Beijing became the stage where the unspoken words of countless countries were finally given a voice. Enough is enough. Enough of interventions justified by power. Enough of economic bullying disguised as policy. Enough of lectures delivered from podiums thousands of miles away. Russia with its strategic might, China with its economic clout, and India with its rising influence formed a triangle of resistance, a coalition not built on hatred, but on the insistence that partnership must replace domination. This defiance did not roar with the sound of warplanes or echo with the threat of missiles. It spoke with the calm yet unshakable power of leaders who understood that sometimes the loudest message comes not from weapons but from unity, from the courage to stand together when the world expects you to kneel. The rise of a multipolar world order is no longer a distant idea whispered in policy circles. It has become a living, breathing reality on the stage in Beijing. For decades, international politics spun around a single axis, with one nation assuming the role of global referee, declaring itself the guardian of democracy, the enforcer of rules, the architect of the future. But history teaches us that power concentrated in one corner of the world never lasts forever, and what unfolded in Beijing was proof that the winds of change are stronger than any empire's ambition. Russia, China, and India standing shoulder to shoulder signaled that the age of unilateral dominance is giving way to a system where multiple centers of power will coexist, compete, and cooperate on equal footing. This is not the birth of chaos, but the dawn of balance, a necessary correction to decades of overreach. A multipolar world means no single leader, no single ideology, no single nation can claim ownership of the planet's destiny. It is the promise that Asia, Africa, Latin America, and beyond will no longer be silent spectators while decisions shaping their lives are made in distant rooms without their voices being heard. When Moscow brings its military might, Beijing its economic empire, and New Delhi its demographic strength and democratic values, they are not just forming alliances, they are shaping a new order where diversity of power becomes a safeguard against domination. This emerging reality does not erase America's importance, but it ends the illusion that Washington alone can chart the course for humanity. It invites the world to imagine diplomacy without arrogance, trade without coercion, security without intimidation. The Beijing meeting sent a clear message that the future will not belong to those who shout the loudest or threaten the hardest, but to those who understand the art of coexistence in a complex, interconnected age. The sight of three powerful leaders choosing collaboration over confrontation, equality over hierarchy, reveals that the unipolar moment in history has passed like a fleeting storm, leaving behind a sky ready for many stars to shine. This is the promise of a multipolar world, a stage wide enough for every nation to stand tall, a system strong enough to survive without bending to the will of one. The moral and strategic strength of India in this alliance cannot be overstated because it brings something to the table that neither military power nor economic wealth alone can provide, the voice of a nation that has long stood for principles even while navigating the rough waters of realpolitik. India has always been more than just a rising power. It is a civilization stretching back thousands of years, carrying within it a weight of history, culture, and philosophy that few nations can match. When India joins Russia and China in Beijing, it does so not only as a military partner or an economic player, but as a nation whose democratic values and moral compass give credibility to the alliance itself. Unlike other powers often perceived as driven purely by strategic ambitions, India brings with it the image of a country that has fought for independence, championed the rights of the developing world, and spoken repeatedly about fairness in international relations. That moral weight matters because global politics is not shaped only by armies and trade routes. It is also shaped by the perception of legitimacy, by the belief that some nations act not only out of self-interest, but out of a sense of justice and balance. Strategically, India's position is unique, bordering China yet cooperating with it, historically close to Russia yet maintaining ties with the West, leading the global South yet engaging with major powers. This ability to bridge divides makes India not just a participant in the alliance, but a potential mediator, a voice of reason when tempers flare, a partner whose commitment to dialogue can prevent conflicts from spiraling out of control. Its economic growth, technological innovation, and demographic potential make it a power impossible to ignore, but it is the combination of strength with restraint, ambition with ethics that sets India apart on the world stage. By standing in Beijing with Russia and China, India sends a message that this alliance is not merely about countering America, it is about creating a more inclusive world order, one where emerging powers claim their seat at the table without apology. India's presence ensures that this coalition is not seen as a closed club of authoritarian giants, but as a partnership where diverse systems, histories, and aspirations can find common ground for the future. Kim Jong Un's arrival in this unfolding drama adds a layer of intrigue and intensity that the world cannot ignore because his presence transforms a diplomatic gathering into a geopolitical earthquake. For years, Kim has been portrayed as the isolated leader of a defiant nation, often dismissed by the West as unpredictable, yet here he is moving toward Beijing at a moment when three of the world's major powers have already sent shockwaves across Washington. His journey itself becomes a statement, a defiance wrapped in symbolism, because it tells the world that North Korea is not as isolated as many would like to believe, that it has friends, allies, or at the very least, partners willing to give it a platform when others try to silence its voice. His arrival complicates the picture for America because it adds an element of unpredictability to a situation already slipping out of Washington's control. If Russia, China, and India uniting was a political earthquake, Kim's presence is the aftershock that forces every strategist in the Pentagon and every diplomat in the State Department to recalculate their assumptions overnight. Suddenly, the narrative of a lone, defiant North Korea is shattered, replaced by the image of a leader stepping into a room where some of the most powerful nations on earth are gathered, ready to listen rather than lecture. It forces the world to ask uncomfortable questions. Is this the birth of a new bloc, one that could challenge not only America's influence, but also its ability to isolate nations through sanctions and threats? Kim's arrival brings theater to diplomacy, a sense of urgency that captures headlines and ignites debates in parliaments, newsrooms, and universities around the globe. It shows that no matter how much pressure is applied, some leaders refuse to be cornered, refuse to accept the roles written for them by others. And as he joins this coalition, whether as a full partner or a symbolic guest, his presence amplifies the message already delivered by Russia, China, and India. The era of one power deciding the fate of all is over. The world, whether ready or not, must now deal with a reality far more complex, far less predictable, and far more defiant than anything imagined before this meeting in Beijing. The message to Washington from this alliance is unmistakable. Respect cannot be demanded through threats, and partnership cannot be built on fear. For decades, America's foreign policy has often leaned on the weight of sanctions, the language of ultimatums, and the assumption that its dominance alone could force nations into compliance. But when Russia, China, India, and even North Korea converge in one place, they are sending a collective voice across oceans and continents that the age of intimidation politics is crumbling before our eyes. Respect is no longer something nations will accept in speeches while being undermined in practice. It is something they now insist upon as equals on the world stage. This alliance rejects the idea that power means the right to lecture others about democracy while ignoring the sovereignty and aspirations of entire regions. It challenges the belief that military might or economic leverage can substitute for genuine dialogue, for fairness, for a recognition that every nation, big or small, has a role in shaping the future. The leaders gathered in Beijing know the risks. They understand the backlash, but they also know that silence would mean submission to a system that has too often sidelined voices unwilling to toe Washington's line. Their message is not a call for hostility, it is a call for dignity. They want cooperation, but on terms that honor sovereignty, trade but without economic blackmail, peace, but without one-sided rules written far from the lands they govern. By standing together, they make it clear that the world will no longer accept a single capital deciding who is friend, who is foe, who deserves aid, and who faces punishment. This is a demand for a new kind of diplomacy, one built not on arrogance but on mutual recognition. The old way of doing things, where threats came first and respect maybe later, has met its reckoning in the form of this alliance. Whether Washington admits it or not, the ground beneath its feet is shifting, and the echo from Beijing carries a simple, undeniable truth. The era of dominance is giving way to the era of equality, and no amount of pressure can reverse a tide that has already begun to rise.